I want to start by sharing a statistic, and it's going to mess you up. 73% of people who lose a spouse or go through divorce say they've considered their life over at some point in that first year. But here's the part that nobody is saying out loud. They are completely wrong. I know that sounds harsh and maybe even a little bit cruel, especially right now. If you are part of that 73%, you're sitting there thinking, you don't understand me. My situation is different. My pain is the kind that you don't come back from. But what if I told you that the worst chapter of your life, that one that you're in right now, the one that has convinced you that your story is completely over, what if that chapter is actually the setup to the best part of your entire life? And not because of some woo-hoo, everything happens for a reason nonsense, but because of how stories actually work, how transformation happens, and how humans actually rebuild. I'm not here to tell you the pain isn't real. I'm here to show you something that you can't see from where you're sitting right now. Let me welcome you to the story of your life. And the thing is, you're about to close it at the worst possible moment. So stick with me for a few minutes, because what I'm about to show you might just save your story. Every compelling story follows a structure, and yours is no different. So let's look at the data of your life and the chapters that you've already written. Chapter 1, childhood. Close your eyes for a second and remember who you were before you knew what heartbreak ever felt like, before you understood loss. You had this wild, unfiltered belief that anything was possible. And here's the most interesting part. You weren't wrong. You were just naive. But that capacity for possibility, that's still in you. It's just buried somewhere in chapter 8 at the moment. Chapter 2, first love. This is where you learned your first lesson about vulnerability. You opened your heart, and maybe it worked out, maybe it didn't. But you learned you could survive feeling deeply. That first love, you thought that was the real deal, right? You thought you'd never feel this way again. And then you did. Do you remember that? Because if you're thinking the same thing about what you lost right now, you'd be wrong all over again. And then we come to chapter 3, where you find your path. This is where you started becoming you. Not someone's child and not someone else's partner, just you. Your career, your identity, and your choices. You had a complete identity before you ever got to chapter 5. You were a whole person. That's not sentimental. That's a fact. And then we come to chapter 4, your independence. You stood on your own 2 feet. You paid your own bills. You made your own decisions. You were free. And then you chose to give some of that up for partnership. Your life had meaning before them. It had joy, it had purpose, it had dreams, it had all of that. You didn't start existing when you met them. You just forgot that for a while. And then we come to chapter 5, marriage. And here's the lie that we've all been sold. Marriage is the climax of your story. It's the happily ever after. It's the peak. Everything before is just a setup, and everything after is just maintenance. But that's complete garbage. That's a fairy tale that we bought because we didn't know any better. Marriage isn't the climax. It's just another chapter. Sometimes it's a good one, sometimes it's a great one, and sometimes it's not. And I'm not saying that your marriage didn't matter. I'm not saying the love wasn't real. I'm saying you were taught to believe that this was the most important chapter of your life. And that belief is what's killing you right now. And chapter 6 is when you start building your life together. It's the house, it's the plans, it's the future. You invested everything, time, money, emotion, identity, into building something that you thought was permanent. But the thing is, nothing's permanent. Nothing. And the sooner that you accept that, the sooner you can stop feeling like a failure just because something ended. I know that it felt solid, and I know that it felt real. Trust me, I've been there. And I'm telling you, it was real. And it's okay to grieve what you built, but it's not okay to let that grief convince you that you can't do it again. And then we come to chapter 7, where everything starts unraveling. In this chapter is where the data stops adding up, the small inconsistencies, the things that didn't make sense. It's your gut telling you that something is wrong, even when you can't prove it. And you tried to fix it. You tried to go back to chapter 6. You tried to ignore the cracks. You tried to be positive and to work on it, and all the other things that people told you to do. But you can't unring a bell. You can't unknow the things that you know. And chapter 7 is the hardest chapter, because you're watching something die in slow motion, and you're absolutely powerless to stop it. And then we come to chapter 8, loss, divorce, betrayal, whatever word that you describe the thing that just detonated your entire life. This is the chapter where you can't breathe, where food tastes like cardboard, where waking up every morning and for one beautiful second you forget, and then you remember, and the weight crushes you all over again. This is the chapter where you're allowed to be a mess, where you're allowed to rage and scream and fall apart, where you're allowed to tell everyone who says everything happens for a reason just to shut the hell up. And here's what the research shows. The average person in chapter 8 experiences symptoms identical to clinical depression. Your brain is literally in a survival mode. You're not weak, you're not broken. You're having a completely normal response to an abnormal level of pain. If you're in chapter 8 right now, I see you. I've been exactly where you are. I know the pain is so consuming that you can't imagine a future where it doesn't hurt like this. And I know you're thinking about closing the book, and you're thinking, the good part is over. I'm just gonna exist until I die. That's it. That's all that's left. But here's the problem with thinking that. You're making a permanent decision based on temporary data. You're in the middle of a storm, and you're trying to predict the entire climate. You're thinking about closing the book right here at chapter 8. And if you do that, you're going to miss the most extraordinary part of your entire life. So before you close it, let me show you what comes next. Chapter 9, survival. This chapter is not inspiring. It's not a montage of you getting your life together. It's just, you're still here. Some days that means just getting out of bed. Some days it means taking a shower, and some days it means just not closing the book. And if I'm being honest, that's enough. And screw anyone who tells you that you should be healing faster or moving on or staying positive. Survival, it's an entire chapter. That's it. You're breathing, and that's a victory. That is the entire damn chapter. And then we come to chapter 10, Rediscovery. This is where something changes. And it's not dramatic, it's not overnight, but you start to notice you went an entire hour without thinking about them. You laughed at something and didn't feel guilty. You made a decision without wondering, what would they think? You started doing things that you used to love, or things you never could do before. You start hearing your own voice again instead of their voice in your head telling you who you should be. And you start to remember, oh, I'm still here. The person I was before them, that person is still here. Buried? Yeah, maybe. Hurt? Definitely. But still here. And that's when we start to realize that chapter 11 comes. And that's new love. Now, hold up. This might not be romantic love. Maybe it is. But it might also be the love for yourself. Love for your life. Love for the fact that you survived something that should have completely destroyed you. This is the chapter where you realize that you can feel joy without guilt. You can laugh without feeling like a betrayal. You can imagine a future that doesn't include them and it doesn't destroy you. This isn't replacement, and it certainly isn't forgetting. It's something entirely new. Something you couldn't have experienced if you stayed in chapter 6. And once you've done that, you come to chapter 12 with new adventures. Places that you never went together because they didn't want to. Dreams you put on hold because it wasn't practical. Experiences you couldn't have had in that old life because you were too busy maintaining it. Here's the thing about chapter 8. It didn't just take something from you, it also freed you from something. From compromise that you didn't realize was costing you, from a future that wasn't actually yours. This is your life now. Not the life that you were building with them. That one ended. This is the life that you thought you were supposed to have. Your actual life. And it's starting to feel really good. And with new adventure comes new memories. Laughter that doesn't come with a side of grief. Joy that's fully present, not haunted by the past. Moments where you're completely here and not half living in what was. You've created new memories. And here's the most controversial part of that. Some of them are actually better than the old ones. Some of them are experiences that you couldn't have had in that old life. Some may even be the exact same experience, but in a completely new light, a better light. And that doesn't mean that the old memories weren't real or that they didn't matter. It means that you're capable of creating multiple chapters of joy. You're not just limited to one. And new memories create new celebrations. Milestones that you thought you'd never reach alone. Achievements that you didn't think were possible. Moments where you look at yourself and you think, holy shit, I did that. Me, by myself. You're celebrating things you never celebrated before. You're honoring yourself in ways that you never did when you were trying to be who they needed you to be. You're learning to be proud of yourself, not for surviving, but for thriving, for becoming someone you actually like. And that is when we get to the climax of your life. This is the moment you realize, and I need you to really hear this, this is the best chapter of your life. Not chapter 5. Not the marriage. Not the before days. And definitely not the good old days. This right here, right now, the life that you built from the ashes of chapter 8. And here's what will absolutely blow your mind. you wouldn't trade this version of you for anything. Not even to go back to the happy version in chapter 6. Because that version of you, they didn't know what they were capable of. They didn't know their own strength. They didn't know they could survive the unsurvivable. This version of you has depth that the old version never had. Compassion that was born from your pain. Boundaries that were born from the betrayal, and clarity that was born from that loss. This version of you knows what matters. It knows who matters, and it knows how to choose yourself, knowing that you're enough all on your own. This is the climax. This is the peak of your story. It's not the end, it's the peak. And here's the part that's really gonna mess with your head. You could not have gotten to chapter 15 without going through chapter 8. Chapter 8 wasn't the end of your story. It was the catalyst for the absolute best part. Now, that doesn't mean that chapter 8 was worth it. That doesn't mean that you're grateful for that pain. That's toxic positivity garbage. It means you took the worst thing that ever happened to you and you alchemized it into the best version of yourself. And that's not gratitude for the pain. That's defiance in face of it. And from there, there's a whole entire book left over of blank pages. Look at them all. There's so many in here. Chapters that you haven't written yet. Chapters that you haven't even imagined possible. Chapter 16, chapter 20, 25, 40. Your story doesn't end at chapter 15. The climax is not the conclusion. There's so much more ahead. And you get to write it however you want. No one else's expectations, no one else's timeline, no one else's definition of what your life should look like. If you close the book at chapter 8, you never get to the part where your story becomes extraordinary. You never get to the moment where you look back and realize that the worst thing that ever happened to you was also the thing that set you free. Not free from the pain, not free from the grief, but free from the life that wasn't actually yours. Free to become who you were always meant to be. So my question to you today, and I want you to actually answer this, not just think about it, but what chapter are you in right now? Are you in chapter 8 and thinking about closing the book? Because I see you. I've been there. Keep reading. Please keep reading. Are you in chapter 10, rediscovering yourself? And you're doing it. It's messy and it's hard, but you're doing it. Maybe you're in chapter 15, living in the climax of your life. Tell someone, share your story. Give them hope that you didn't have in chapter 8. Wherever you are, your story is not over. And anyone that tells you it is, they're wrong. They're reading somebody else's book and trying to apply it to your life. But it's clear. People who keep turning the page past chapter 8 report higher life satisfaction than they had before the loss. Your story matters, not despite the pain, but because of what they built from it. Your story matters, your chapters matter, all of them, including chapter 8, especially chapter 8, because it's the bridge to everything that comes next. So stop thinking about closing the book. Stop letting chapter 8 convince you that the good part is over. Keep turning the page, because the best chapters are still ahead. And until then, you keep writing your story.